Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Coffee Time and Plant Talks, where we all talking about plants and drinking your favorite coffee or tea. I'm your host, Natalia, and I just love plants and everything about plants. Today, we'll have on our podcast a guest from Washington State University, Carol Miles. She is the professor and vegetable specialist. Hi, Carol. How are you? And I'm so excited to have you here.
Hi, Natalia. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's always fun to talk.
Especially about melons.
Yeah, I think melons are a wonderful crop to grow, but even a better crop to eat. So yeah, I think they're very fun.
Absolutely. So tell us what got you into this, into melons. How did you even start to think about it? What got you interested in growing, not only growing, but also studying melons?
Well, if I can separate melons into watermelons and then other melons. So I started with
Hmm.
watermelons, and I started with what we call icebox size watermelons. So they're kind of like a size of a basketball or smaller. And when they
Uh-huh.
get really small, then they're called a personal size. So those are the categories. And then the big ones that, certainly probably most people were familiar with is the picnic, which is pretty large.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
started with icebox watermelon. I had been doing some work in Asia. I was in Taiwan, and they just, there's so many melons on the market of that icebox size, and they did not exist in the United States. So we're going back 25, 30 years ago.
Hmm.
And that was not a market size or category that was sold in the United States. It just wasn't in the market. But they were, certainly over the, around the world, and just really good quality, wonderful colors, and just so much about them. And so I'm in Western Washington, and we do have a hard time growing picnic watermelons because they require a longer growing period. And icebox
Yeah.
watermelon and the smaller watermelon and then melons, they reach maturity in a short amount of time. So we can grow them
Hmm.
in Western Washington. So that piqued my interest. And I started with icebox watermelon. We started with over 100 varieties. The time that we started that year, doing a search of all the databases, there were about 400 varieties available in the United States. And I grew
Watermelons.
watermelon, and I
That's
grew a quarter of them.
silly.
So I grew,
That's ridiculous. I
yeah.
didn't even know there's so many varieties of watermelon. That's
Well, and for us,
wild.
it was all about days to maturity. So it was all about finding something that would mature in
Mhm.
Western Washington, by the end of the season. So,
And all of them are seedless, so you worked with some
nope.
seeded.
At the times, again, going back 25 years ago, watermelon, seedless watermelons were certainly in the marketplace, but they weren't dominant in the marketplace. So they were seeded and seedless. But today, I think almost everything is seedless because it's easier eating.
And I have to admit that I miss seeded watermelons. There's something about it. It just, I know scientifically speaking might be wrong, but it gives extra crunch. I really miss that one.
Well, and I know a
Yeah.
lot of people eat the watermelon seeds. So, you save them and then you heat them up. I was going to say, either roast them or pan fry them, whatever. And then they're edible.
Yeah. 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 And you've done a lot of grafting, the work that you did with melons and everything. But before we get into the grafting, can you actually explain in a simple way what grafting is?
Yeah. Grafting is joining together a rootstock, so the bottom of the plant that is growing in the soil, and then the top that is going to be growing out of the soil. And you want to graft them together such that the graft union is well above the soil line. And the reason we graft, at least the dominant reason I was grafting, was for soil-borne diseases. So verticillium
Mm.
in watermelon is specifically what we were doing. And that's because there's no resistance for verticillium in watermelon. And the only way to get resistance into watermelon would be through a transgenic. And transgenic watermelon are not acceptable in the marketplace. So the only way to get resistance is grafting a resistant rootstock,
Mhm.
to your susceptible variety. And so that's what we did. And certainly we were able to show that resistance worked really well. Yield was great. And it gave us very good control of verticillium, which is a major problem that we have in Washington.
Mhm. So with the grafting, did you notice any better qualities on the taste?
No, I personally didn't notice there was not any increase in quality. I think most people are concerned about a decrease in quality, whether or not there's, just a change in the flavors. But in all of my work, there was no impact at all on quality. I think the biggest impact we saw was a delay in maturity. So, um,
Okay,
so
I see.
maturity could be delayed maybe up to a week here in
Okay,
Washington.
okay. Yeah. I guess somebody can see it well if it's not mature on time, that the quality, but that's already side
Yeah, it's
summaries
just
of that.
right.
And for the grafting, do you think that only big commercial companies do that? Or you can do it just like, on your backyard? This is something that you can do at home? Because I'm just imagining the seedlings are so fragile and
Well,
tiny and
not
so.
melons. Melon seedlings are really firm and probably the easiest crop to graft in terms of uh,
Hmm.
dexterity, but they're the most difficult crop to graft in terms of success. So
Oh,
therefore, they're
why
easy
is
to put
that?
together. th- They just, the success rate is just lower than like a tomato, for example.
Uh-huh.
Anybody, in my opinion, anybody can graft a tomato and probably be successful if you follow some basic ground rules. Whereas melons, watermelons, they're tricky because they're just more particular. And I
Hmm.
think what it is that with the melon, it takes longer for the graft union to form. This is my opinion. Takes longer for the graft union to form, so the top material it's not getting anything from the rootstock. So you
Right.
have to give it a nice humid environment because all the water, it's transpiring and it's not able to take any water up from the roots. So everything has to come in from the leaves. So you just have to give it the right environment, humidity, temperature, light, so that it doesn't photosynthesize too much because that depletes water status and carbohydrates and
Yeah.
everything um,
Hmm.
before that graft union forms, which can take up to 2 weeks.
I was just about to ask you, how long does it take?
Yeah, for
For 2 weeks.
melons, watermelons,
Yes.
melons, it can be up to 2 weeks, but it really all depends on that grafting environment. Whereas a tomato, as far as I'm aware, you know, it can form within a few days. So within a
Mm.
few days, you've got water transport, you've got photosynthetes moving around. The whole plant is functioning. Whereas a melon, you're looking at one plus weeks.
That's my plants are just amazing. Just to think about and imagine you cut a piece of one plant, stuck into the piece of another plant, and they miraculously connect the tissues and vessels and everything inside to work as one unit. It's mind
Yeah.
blowing.
Well, I mean, as
Super
you
cool.
know, people have been grafting grapes and
Hmm.
trees and, perennials for what, centuries, if
Yeah.
not longer. Um,
Yeah. I
so
still I still getting surprised every time I think about it. It just wow.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
the issue most people have, when you talk about vegetable grafting, at least this has always been my experience, is people
Mm,
are always surprised, if not shocked, that you would graft a annual crop. Perennials, I think people understand because it's a long-term investment. But an annual
mhm.
crop, it's, you're growing it for a few months and it's done, it's over. And so people are kind of like, well, where's the value in that? But the reality is that there's huge value in it. And so
Yeah.
the watermelon industry is shifting. California, I think, is almost all grafted watermelon now, certainly the Southeast United States, because you bring in all this resistance that
Right.
you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
bring in through breeding, and it would take you decades through breeding. So root knot nematode resistance, verticillium, fusarium, there's just all this resistance you can bring in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, definitely if you think about the loss that you potentially can have, and then you will not have it because of grafting, it's worth it. I think every time when you doubt about something, does it worth it or not, you gotta remember what was the goal of what you're doing and what would happen if you don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just yeah. Yeah. And additionally to watermelons, what type of melons did you work on?
Well, so for watermelons, I worked on just a whole array. I had no limitations over
Mm,
color, skin color, that rind color and flesh color. So we worked one. In fact, I've looked for a diversity. So we had all the way from white flesh, all the way, to yellow, orange, orchid, all the way to deep red, just, the whole palette there,
Nice.
which was,
That's
again,
nice.
just really fun because they're all out there. They were just, as I always like to say, these were new crops for the United States, but they're just new to us. They're
Hmm.
not new to a large
Yeah.
number of people in other places of the world where, this is everyday food.
Yeah. I remember back in Ukraine when I was a kid, we had watermelon yellow inside. So that
Yeah.
was something like, wow, that's interesting. So you got to taste all of them.
We did. We did. We lined them up. I just remember my big field day, like the pinnacle of my watermelon days. We had 77 watermelons on the table and just going through and oh my
Mhm.
God, the sugar, it's like you're just overloaded with sugars by the time just even get halfway through that because
Yeah.
the sugars
I
on them are
can
pretty high.
I can imagine students. It's just that's cool work, I gotta tell you. You
Yeah.
gotta taste everything and summer hot, just imagine that. Awesome. And is there anything that surprised you the most that, something, I don't know, in a good way, shocked you, surprised you when you've been working with melons?
Well, I think my work with icebox watermelon, and we're going back to 2004, I think, so 20 some years ago. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's the first crop I've worked on where it was a new crop to the United States. Again, watermelon was not new, but icebox watermelon were relatively new. They were seasonal. They would come and they would go, and you wouldn't see them everywhere. And
Mm-hmm.
this is my recollection at the time. This is what I was told. So take it for what it's worth. Is that a grocery store, a major grocery store nationally, test marketed icebox watermelon in 5 major cities in the United States, and within 2 years, they were in every store throughout the United States all year long. And it took within 2 years for that to happen. I've never seen a crop move that fast in
Yeah, it's a quick turnaround.
very, very quick. But I think it comes back to the fact that, they're good. They taste good. The size is great, you take them home and they're, family sized. And you can
Yeah.
grow them, they're grown in, certainly not here in Western Washington, but in other parts of the country or south of the border, they're easily moved. They have good storage life, so you don't have to worry too much about, sitting on a truck for a couple of days because they're just fine. They're easy.
Do you see any varieties right now in the store that you know that's coming from basically your studies?
Not watermelon per se, so I see
Uh-huh.
and I'm not good enough to taste a watermelon and tell you, "Ah, that's beauty," you know?
Hmm.
I couldn't do that anymore. Probably 20 years ago, I could. I will say that when we get into melons, so then we started melon work here, gosh, 10 years ago, and so I do a lot of testing for breeders and seed companies. That's what I do. And a lot of this material is generally not in the United States, the US marketplace. Sometimes they're breeding lines, so they haven't been released yet, and the breeder's trying to decide, do I release it? And then do I release it into the United States? Those are two
Okay.
separate questions. So with
Okay.
melons, we tested a line which, in my view, was the best melon I have ever had, ever. And yeah, I see that now in the marketplace. And I'm like, we had that as a line. I remember that.
Yeah. I'm kind of, leaning towards the question, are you doing any work with melons now? Should I change my job?
No, but I will give you the name of this melon, and I think you and everybody you know should try it. It's called I think they named it in the U.S. market as Picasso.
Oh, so, okay, I'll definitely not keep my eyes open
And
on that.
it's a cross, it's and
Mhm.
the age this comes out of a Japanese seed company, and they're just, really quality driven. So they have a very
Mm.
high standard for quality, for eating quality, flesh firmness, sugars, just just all of that is just really good. And so this is a cross. It's a cross between a couple of different types of melons. But it has an overlying yellowish, pale yellow skin with green kind of flecks or stripes. So it's very
Good.
unique, and they called it Picasso, and it's like, yeah, we tasted that
Now,
before it was in the United States, and I was like, that was our number 1.
Yeah, now I can see myself in the store searching for Picasso. Where are you?
Well,
Dude.
there might be different ones out there, different names at this point because it was a while ago. And again, once breeding lines.
Yeah, I'll have to Google if it still keeps the. I'll definitely will do some research about it.
Yeah.
And you worked with a lot of students. What did they get to you when you with you in the project with melons? What did they get? Did they graft by themselves? Like what did they job?
Yeah. So I had one student was working with me on our melon project here in Mount Vernon. So again, we were grafting for disease management, and that was a graduate student project. It was a master's student project, and she did all the grafting. And previous to that, I had another student, a PhD student,
Mm.
and she worked on watermelon grafting, and we developed a technique for grafting watermelon that would be suitable for robotics. And so that's kind of a whole nother issue, but like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, they can all be grafted robotically because they're removing the cotyledons on the rootstock. Whereas melons, you have
Mm-hmm.
to keep the one cotyledon on because of the carbohydrates and
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
transpiration issues. And so we developed a methodology where both cotyledons could be removed from the rootstock of a watermelon and get grafting success. And so that was a
nice.
PhD project. And then we shifted that technology into melons. And then we were looking at melons at rootstocks. So there were some rootstocks being developed in the United States. So at the time, all those rootstocks were being imported into the United States, and the cost of rootstocks was very high. And so
Mm.
there were breeding programs for rootstocks in other parts of the world. So they have their own rootstock material, whereas we're paying import costs on a per seed basis, and they're very high. It's probably has been the biggest barrier to adoption is the cost of
Mm.
seed for rootstocks. So we were testing rootstock lines for some US companies
Mm-hmm.
and shifted that work to melons because melons can be grown here in Western Washington with much greater success than a watermelon just because of the long days to maturity for the watermelon.
Hmm. And if speaking about the United States, do you know where is the melons are being grown right now? Is it still
Um,
California or Florida? No.
no, I'm going to say the Carolinas, so North Carolina,
Oh, okay.
Georgia, Texas. It's been
Oh,
a few
okay.
years since I've looked at the growing stats, but those areas have
Mm-hmm.
been the number one. And then California certainly does a lot of watermelon production.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
But
That's
California
amazing.
is off season, so the main, like the main U.S. season is going to be Texas, Georgia,
Yeah.
North Carolina, I think, and then California has the what we call the shoulder seasons, earlier and later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool.
Well,
And
and then I will
uh-huh.
say that kind of another interesting thing with watermelon coming in from Mexico and probably again other places of the world, but for us Mexico is watermelon juice. And so I don't know, you can start to look around and you'll see watermelon juice, and that was not a product in the market. I just remember, being
Mm-hmm.
contacted by companies who really wanted to get watermelon juice established in the United States, and now it is.
I'm just curious, why would not that be the product? Like, kind of.
I think the value isn't there. You've got to have the processing, you've got to juice it, you've got to, you know, seal it up
Mm-hmm.
somehow. So can it, jar it, whatever. It's in a processing end product, and I'm not sure what the return is on a per fruit basis versus a fresh market fruit.
Yeah. Yeah. Marketing.
Yeah, and you got it has to pay, right? It's got to pay enough for everybody to be in the
Yeah. You
business.
got definitely you gotta find a way to promote it so it's being distributed and purchased. But from the other point of view, when you look at the watermelon, what is it, like 90% it's basically liquid
Yeah,
water. So it makes
yeah.
sense to have juice,
It makes
hopefully.
and again, watermelon juice is consumed in many parts of the world.
Yeah. 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 In Ukraine we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. And what do you have if you think about the work you've done with watermelons and melons, what's your favorite memory with working with those plants and students? Anything standing out when you think about it?
Well, I think it was tackling the robotics question, and I don't think our work has been adopted by the industry, but it was raised as the number one barrier for watermelon grafting was the the issue of that cotyledon and how to sustain the growth, and we figured it out. In order to transfer that technology to, mainstream robotics, there's a whole, there's other things that have to be done, and but I think the fact that we laid the groundwork for that, maybe in 10 years you'll see it. I don't know, um, but at least I know the groundwork is there, and I feel very proud of that. I think that's what, I've enjoyed the most about my job in general is that we get to start with the fundamental questions, and then I generally step back and let other people take it on, take
Yeah,
it forward.
that, that's very nice. So, if someone is listening to our podcast today and decides that they want to try to graft their melons or watermelons, I don't know, in the
Mhm.
backyard, what would be the first step you would suggest them to start with?
For grafting watermelons, you've really got to have that correct environment. So you got to really be prepared to give it that humidity, coolness, shading. And it's pretty simple to do it. You can do it with a pot in a plastic bag, so the plastic bag keeps all the humidity in, and then just, keep it in a cool room, without direct sunlight. I mean, it's all doable, but just be prepared for this, success rate is probably going to be pretty low until you really figure out that environment
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
melons. And then depending on how you're doing it, so the standard method for grafting watermelons is called the one cotyledon. So you're slicing the plant at about a 60-degree angle. So you're taking the top off of the rootstock and a 60-degree angle, and you have to scrape out, and you just use a razor blade. So nothing special there, very simple. And then you have to
Mhm.
scrape out the meristem tissue that's at the base of the remaining cotyledon. And
Mhm.
so there's some precision there. If you don't do that and your graft is successful, the rootstock is going to regrow. It's going to grow from
Right.
that meristem tissue, and it's going to take over the plant.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
so you have to cut at the right angle, and then you have to scrape out that meristem without damaging the rootstock. So
The
it's
rootstock. Yeah.
a little
By
tricky.
any by any chance, do you have any videos? Your student maybe took the videos how they did the grafting?
I don't recall that we have videos, but we have fact sheets. Yep.
Okay, so there are pictures in there. So
Yep.
cool.
Pictures are all there,
And
the steps are all there, and we have it in Spanish.
where can our listeners find the fact sheets?
Yeah, so my website is vegetables.wsu.edu.
Okay, that was easy. And
Yep.
I will put it in the notes as well.
Yeah.
And now I know you are a vegetable professional. So are you working with any other vegetables right now? I kind of know you're working with sweet potato, you're working with tea, but any other vegetables?
Those are the 2 main crops I'm working with right now. So in my program, I tend to focus pretty heavily on a couple of crops at one time, and I generally stick with it for 6 or 10 years, whatever however long it takes to really work through these issues and really get it established and going, and then I move on to the next thing. So for me, sweet potatoes are very big in my program right now. Um,
Yeah.
and we're still trying
How
to
many?
decide. Go ahead.
Uh-huh.
Sorry.
I just want to ask how many cultivars you working right now with the sweet potatoes?
How many cultivars? Well, cultivars, we're working probably with 4 cultivars, but again, my work is with breeders and we're screening lines. So we're
Okay.
screening breeding lines, and we released one 2 years ago and named it
Nice.
Cascade. So Cascade for Western Washington.
Oh,
And then we have
okay.
another one that we recommended for release, and we provided some names for that. So we'll see what it comes out as. So
Cool. Cool. And I'm big sweet potato person.
yeah. And then
It's
I work here in I work in Western Washington, and what all the markets tell us, the buyers, the produce managers at, all of our big markets is you're never going to a Washington grown sweet potato is not going to compete for in price with a California or a North Carolina sweet potato. We cannot grow sweet potatoes here at a lower price than they grow them in their main production zones. So what we
Mhm.
have to do here is we have to find we have to find sweet potatoes that have different qualities than the
Mhm.
mainstream sweet potato. And so our new release Cascade is a white flesh, dry flesh,
Mhm.
whereas the
Mhm.
main sweet potatoes that you're going to see in the market are orange and soft and sweet. So
Mhm.
we're going with more of the Asian type, which is
Mhm.
white, dry, purple skin, purple flesh.
Purple
That's
is
our
great.
That's our
Yeah.
new project we're working on. So this year we have our first purple variety trial. It took us 2 years to get the material in and propagate it to get enough plant material to plant a field trial.
Yeah, purple is great. I mean, even from health perspective, you always want to choose purple over white when you talk about potatoes or sweet potatoes.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah,
And
I'm
then
just still thinking, how cool is that?
right. So I mean, the sweet potato work here is going really well. I don't know how much time you want to spend talking on it, but we have a major insect problem, so that kind of diverted us.
Oh, what kind of insect is on the sweet potato? As you see, I know nothing about sweet potato.
Wireworm. So we are a big potato growing area. This valley where I am, I'm in the Skagit Valley. It's about 10,000 acres of potatoes. So most of the land rotates through potatoes about every 4 years. And wireworm are a pest on potatoes, but they have controls with insecticides. Sweet potatoes are new to Washington, and there really are no registered chemicals just because it's a new crop here. And the crop is very
Mm.
susceptible to wireworm. So
So
we immediately
why a worm is actually affecting sweet potatoes as well?
right. So it's
Mm.
a larval stage of a beetle, and it can survive. A larvae can survive in your soil for up to 3 years. So
Mhm.
so it's got a long population longevity. And the first year we grow sweet potatoes here, we grow the sweet potatoes just fine, but basically we had zero marketability because of all the damage, the wireworm damage. So in year two, we shifted the whole program to wireworm resistance.
Mm. Mm.
And so that's where we started screening breeding lines for resistance, and our new release Cascade is wireworm resistant.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's bad to have insects, but it's also good, especially for science, because you learn how to fight them.
Yeah, sometimes very unfortunately, you think you're doing one thing and nature tells you you have to do something else. So,
Yeah, and especially when you're doing the PhD and it totally reroutes your work into something else. And yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Speaking about sweet potato, I just remember that I always have sweet potatoes in my house on the shelves. And I just, a few weeks ago, I saw my potatoes sprouting like really well, like leaves showing up. So of course I planted it. So now I have a sweet potato in my hut outside.
Well, good.
Looking good.
And the other thing to know about sweet potatoes is the vine tips are vegetables. So the whole plant is edible. The whole plant is, consumable.
Okay, now tell us more about that. When would you eat them? How would you cut them? How would you
Yeah,
cook
so
them?
the way that they're grown in the market, for the market, the sweet potato greens is cutting back the top 8 inches or so, 6 to 8 inches of the vine tip, and that just gets bunched, and that's your vegetable. And so, looking at that in the
Mhm.
Seattle market, we have a couple of farmers now selling sweet potato greens in the Seattle market, and what they tell their customers is that the quality is better than spinach. So if you're used to eating spinach,
Mhm.
sweet potatoes doesn't have that oxalic acid, which kind of has that,
Right.
back of
Yeah.
your throat
Yeah.
flavor impact there. It doesn't have that, and it holds up better in cooking. Spinach tends to wilt pretty quickly and significantly, and sweet potatoes just they maintain their structure when you
Mhm.
saute them or you can also eat them fresh in a salad. They're completely edible. And then the whole vine is edible. So and it's used again in other places in the world. It's livestock feed.
That's it. I'm shocked because as much as I mean, I'm a horticulturist. All my education was with plant. Besides that, I'm very all about plant-based nutrition. I didn't know that. So it's like embarrassing but super cool information.
But there's no reason you would know it because it's not like you can go anywhere in the United States and see sweet potato greens in a market.
It's, yeah, that is true. And to be fair, I should know that, but to be fair, we don't do sweet potatoes. At least we did not do sweet potatoes in Ukraine. That's where I'm coming from. So I didn't really know much about I learned sweet potatoes when I got here.
Yeah.
But like we do, for example, garlic greens, we
Hmm.
do use them for cooking, the garlic tips, and it's extremely delicious.
Yeah.
So that's remind me, something that you wouldn't think about it, but hey, it's possible.
Yeah, and I think, if you're eating for your health, if you're eating, if you're health conscious and you're making food selections based on that, then sweet potatoes are really, from my perspective, a fabulous crop because you've got a tuber crop that's more healthy than a potato. Sorry,
Mhm.
potato people. But, you got more nutrition there, and then you've got an edible green. A potato you cannot eat, it's toxic. Whereas a sweet potato,
Yes.
different
Yeah,
family, right? I think that's important to make,
absolutely. Yeah.
completely different family, and the whole plant is edible.
Yeah, that's very cool. So, question for you. Do you think it's important for people to know where their food is being grown from and how? And why would you think it's important?
So my simple answer to that is yes. I do think it's important that we know where our food comes from. And from my perspective, just, you know, again, kind of keeping it simple, I think that your food production is community. And when you're buying locally, you're supporting your community. And if you just look
Hmm.
around, I mean, if each one of us just, goes outside and looks around, you ask yourself, what do you want this to look like? If you live in an area with farming and if you expect that farming to stay there, then somebody has to be buying it. And it seems
Yeah,
like it should be you or us, each one of
absolutely.
us, to
Yeah.
keep our farming community alive and thriving. I think, certainly coming out of the pandemic, I think, as policymakers, there was a lot learned about supply chains. And,
Hmm.
when you're completely relying on external food and now you have no supply chains, that's a big problem. And so keeping a vibrant food production community alive and thriving is important, when things happen.
Absolutely. And when you've been talking before about that sweet potato from Western Washington cannot overdo sweet potato from California by price. But at the same time, I understand the price point reason, but also when you can physically go to the field of sweet potato and see the way it's been grown, wouldn't you want to buy there? And even if it costs a little bit more, but at least you can see how it is being taken care of and what they do to the soil and to the plant. It's another question. Local food might be a little bit more expensive, but it's definitely worth that.
Yeah. And certainly, the farmers that we're working with, this is our third year with on farm trials with sweet potatoes. Our first year, we had 14 on farm trials. Last year was our
Mhm.
second year, we had 27. And this year, we have 70.
Wow.
So that's the interest on the farmers, right? They're telling each other and they're interested in working to get, to test this crop. And everybody who marketed sweet potatoes last year, they sold out immediately.
Yeah.
So they're getting a market for their local crop, and people appreciate, just like you said, they appreciate
Hmm.
what they're seeing and where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And the price
And
isn't extremely different,
mm,
but it's enough
yeah.
different to, it's cheaper if you go to the grocery store.
Well, yeah. But again, it all goes back. How do you value the food? We can buy cheaper and it's been commercially grown and you don't know what kind of pesticides, how often it's been. Of course, we have standard and policy, how much pesticides can be done. But also if you can watch the field by yourself, it just makes it more relatable, I would say, than just getting it. And California is not far, it's neighbors, but still, it's not the same.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Yeah, like me personally, I would want to go and if I wanna purchase local sweet potato, I would want to meet the grower and see the field and look at the plants throughout the whole stages. Just see, it's a beautiful plant, by the way. It looks very cool as well. So yeah, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I I appreciate when people do choose sweet potato over, I don't know, potato chips, obviously. So maybe next step will be choosing the local sweet potato. Yeah, great. Well, Carol, this was very interesting. I learned a lot, a lot of things I had no idea. So that's super cool. We kind of switched from melon to sweet potato. I love it. And I feel like I'll be inviting you at some point back to talk maybe about tea.
Be happy to talk about tea. And as I was just kind of reflecting on melons and your question about, some of my I'm trying to remember what your question was, but, like, what do I recall? I wanted to share
Mm,
with you probably one of my favorite things that I saw with when we did our melon work here. So I'm at a research center. We have, 20 graduate students and, 60
mhm.
people overall working here, but 20 graduate students. And I remember walking by the graduate student office one day, and there was every student sitting at their desk with half a watermelon, eating with a spoon. Because we had so many watermelons and, all these different types and everything. And I will always remember that picture of just everybody just happily eating watermelons at their desk, just, cutting them in half and just scooping them out. And yeah.
That's so so cool. And I'm pretty sure when the harvest time came, you had no problem to had enough people to help you with the harvest.
Yeah. Well, we all work in our own programs when it comes to harvest, but we give away everything, and that's the
Mhm.
that's the pleasure of it all. Is we do our yield data we have to do, and we have to cut those melons in half, which is where all those halves come from. And then I can't.
Mhm.
There's only certain places I can give them to because now they're cut, and we don't
Right.
have a certified kitchen or anything, and we're taking out the very an inch cubed inch because that's what we're doing our data measures with. And so you get these half a watermelon with a cubed inch
Oh,
missing from the middle. And so, but they all found a home. I think that's the important part is they all left here because people really enjoyed them.
oh yeah. I haven't met the person who told me they don't like watermelon. I have to say I know the person who doesn't like melon, but also I don't really know. Now I would ask what kind of melon you specifically do not like.
Yeah.
There's so many of them.
Well, then now you go into most grocery stores probably year round. Certainly in our area year round, and you can see different melons in there. And
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
I just again just encourage everybody try some different melons because there are some really good melons.
Yeah, and they very healthy and then full of fiber and vitamins, and it's really worth to have that fruit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Carol. That was really good. I really like that. I hope our listeners enjoy that as well.
Thank you so much, Natalia. It's always a pleasure to talk. So thank you.
Thank you. And just a quick reminder, everything shared on this podcast is for informational and educational purpose only. I'm here to share what I've learned and experienced, but this is not a medical, agricultural, or professional advice. Always do your own research or consult a professional about your health, garden, or business. Thank you for listening.